Today, we're going to dive into a massive, invisible library of our cultural heritage. We're talking about art, film, and literature that's become trapped in a legal black hole.
What if I told you that you could walk into a library, but most of the shelves were just sealed off? You can see the titles, you know the books are there, but you can't open a single one. Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, right?
Well, it's not hypothetical at all. It's the very real and very frustrating situation for countless pieces of our shared history. And we're not just talking about obscure stuff. We're talking about photographs, home movies, books, and music that literally tell the story of the 20th century.
All right, so what is this copyright limbo we're talking about? Let's actually define the problem.
The official term for these pieces is an orphan work, and it's pretty simple, really. It just means two things are true. First, the work is still protected by copyright. And second, even after you've tried really hard to find them, you just can't identify or locate the person who owns that copyright. Think of a book from a publisher that went out of business or photos from an artist who left no heirs. You can't ask for permission because there's no one to ask. They've basically become cultural ghosts.
And that's where the real tragedy kicks in. Museums can't show certain photos. Libraries can't digitize entire collections of books. Filmmakers can't use incredible old footage. And it's not because an owner is saying no. It's because of a void. There's just silence. And in that silence, creativity and scholarship just grind to a halt. Now, it's easy to hear this and think, okay, that sounds like a pretty niche problem for librarians, right? Well, let's just say the scale of this loss is absolutely staggering. You have to see the numbers.
50 million. And that's a conservative number. But the truly incredible part is where that figure even comes from.
Yep, you heard that right. Over 50 million orphan works. And that was just in the UK, more than a decade ago. The true global number is probably in the hundreds of millions. We are talking about a colossal, unbelievable loss of accessible culture. And this is absolutely not just a UK problem. Right here in the US, a study back in 2005 at Carnegie Mellon found that for most books published in the 1920s, they just couldn't find the publishers. An entire decade of our literature is effectively locked away from us.
This quote here from Sharon Fire with the UCLA Library really gets to the heart of who's on the front lines of this fight. The entire mission of librarians and archivists is to preserve and share knowledge. Orphan works are this giant wall standing in the way of that fundamental goal.
Okay, so we have this massive locked library. Is there a key? Is there any way to get in? Well, for institutions here in the US, there is one very powerful, if a little complicated tool they can use. That tool is a legal doctrine called fair use. It's a really flexible, really powerful concept in US copyright law. And it's not some sneaky loophole. It's a foundational part of the system, designed to make sure copyright helps creativity, rather than just stifling it. It really is like a master key.
So how does it work? Well, to figure out if something is fair use, courts do this kind of balancing test with 4 factors. They ask, what's the purpose of what you're doing? What's the nature of the original thing you're using? How much of it are you using? And finally, what's the effect on the potential market for the original?
Now, for that first factor, the big question these days is whether the use is transformative. Are you just making a copy, or are you doing something totally new with it? For instance, digitizing a book to create a searchable database, courts have found that to be highly transformative. You're not creating a substitute for reading the book, you're creating a whole new research tool.
And this is where it all clicks for orphan works. That fourth factor, the effect on the market, is so important here. I mean, think about it. How can your use possibly harm the market for work if the owner can't even be found to participate in that market? There's literally no one to sell a license, so there's no market for a library to harm. This makes the fair use case for orphan works incredibly strong.
Now, fair use is definitely the main tool in the toolbox, but it's not the only one. The legal toolbox is actually pretty deep, which just goes to show how hard institutions are working to crack this problem. So, besides fair use, there's a part of the Copyright Act called Section 108. If fair use is like a flexible path through the woods, Section 108 is like a very narrow, very specific pier. It's what's called a safe harbor for libraries and archives. But it only applies to really specific things like preservation or interlibrary loans. It's just nowhere near as versatile.
And beyond that, lawyers and librarians get even more creative. They might use something called a quitclaim grant, which is basically where a potential owner says, hey, I don't know for sure if I own this, but if I do, you have my permission. It just shows the complex legal gymnastics required to try and unlock these works.
Okay, so if we have all these dedicated people and all these legal tools, why is this still such a gigantic problem?
how did we even get here in the first place?
Well, it turns out a series of well-intentioned changes to copyright law created a perfect storm. Back in the day, under the 1909 law, you actually had to put a copyright notice on your work and renew it. If you forgot, it entered the public domain. But then, in 1976, protection became automatic the second you created something. And then in 1988, the terms were stretched to last for decades and decades after an author's death.
So you see what happened. We created a system where copyright is automatic, lasts for over a century, and requires zero effort to maintain a public record of who owns what. The result was an information black hole that just started swallowing our culture. We actually designed a system that manufactures orphans.
So why not just pass a law to fix it? Seems obvious, right? Well, Congress has tried, but it always gets stuck. There's this huge disagreement over what a diligent search even means. How hard do you have to look? And in a really fascinating twist, some of the same library groups that used to push for a new law now actually prefer to rely on the flexibility of fair use. They're afraid a new law might actually be worse and be too restrictive.
And all of that leaves us with this fundamental question. This isn't just a legal debate about dusty old books, it's a conflict between two core values we hold: our desire to protect an artist's creation and our need to access, share, and build upon our own collective culture. So as the digital age continues, we have to ask, when the preservation of our collective past clashes with the protection of private property, which should we choose?